Welcome back to Radio Entrepreneurs. I'm Jonathan Freedman, and our guest in the studio today, Mark Heinzelman of Murtha Cullina. Welcome to Radio Entrepreneurs.
Hi, Jonathan. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
And somebody that needs no introduction, Mark Z Legal, joining us as well. Mark, great to see you.
Great to see you too, John. Thanks for having me on and co-hosting with you on this segment.
You want to make a formal introduction to Mark? Talk about Mark and the firm a little bit, or at least tell us what he does?
Sure. Mark is he's counsel at Murtha Cullina, which is a regional firm, and he gets involved in litigation in federal and state courts. Mark also has a specialty in the hospitality and entertainment field, as well as doing all different types of litigation. Very well respected and well known in the legal space.
Excellent. Well, nice introduction, Mark. I hope you're not blushing too much. It's great to have you on the show. Mark, you touched Mark, you touched a little bit on the hospitality industry, and maybe that's an area that we can start. Mark, people are flooding back to hospitality in droves, and presenting perhaps some new issues for hospitality owners and organizations in advance that we saw in advance of COVID. And sure, everybody is struggling with staffing levels, et cetera. What are some of the things that you're seeing in that space, or some of the things that have your attention and your radar going?
So just to provide a little bit of backdrop, as Mark mentioned, I do work predominantly with clients in the hospitality industry. So that includes hotels, restaurants, movie theaters, and performance venues are typically the big four that I work with. So as you can imagine, the last few years have been a little harrowing for the folks in those industries. And fortunately, what I'm seeing right now is a rebound. I'm hearing reports that people are going back to the theaters. Reservations are up at restaurants. Hotel occupancy rates are up. So, and that's not even necessarily just local to here in Boston and in Massachusetts. It's really a national trend. And I don't think it's any secret to your viewership that people are getting back to their daily routines. Life is somewhat returning to normal. And a big part of that in the hospitality industry is actually getting the guests under their roof, get the general public back engaged again. And, it's
big. It seems to be big. Just anecdotally, I could say I was in the theater district one day last night with a friend that lives in the area. And he said, "What is going on here?" I said, "People are back in the theater." It was mobbed in the streets. So just give a sense. It sounds like it's happening elsewhere. Great sign for the industry.
Yeah. And you really hit the nail on the head. Things are coming back in a big way. And at least in the movie industry right now, a big component of it is that during COVID, there was no product. No films were being made. To the extent that films were on the burner, they were being put on the back burner. But now the product is back. So people are coming back to the cinemas, and that's a great sign. But with that, I'm finding that some of my clients in the hospitality space are focusing in large part on the actual hospitality aspect of their business, as well they should. However, there are issues that maybe aren't getting the attention that they deserve. And a big part of that is dealing with contracts, dealing with vendor contracts, really any kind of contract. I've unfortunately been in some scenarios where there were some stale contracts that predated COVID that hadn't been updated during the intervening period. And there were deficiencies in the language. And I think it's better to be on the offensive rather than the defensive. So I would emphasize for those in the hospitality industry, take a look at your contracts. Make sure that you have, for example, language that establishes somebody else's insurance coverage as primary over your own. That's something that's very simple, but it goes a long way in the event, for example, that you have a property damage lawsuit on your hands. Being able to revert back to a contract and say, I'm entitled to indemnity, it's right here in black and white, is something that's really important as operations begin to resume.
Is that something that, thinking about, pandemic or not, is there a regular cycle you recommend your clients would look at their vendor contracts? I mean, is it every 1 or 2 years, or is it something that, can you say, I know it's a generalization, but really, we have a monumental shift in the economy that's happened over the last couple of years. That's certainly a good opportunity. So any shift like that's a good time. But in general, can we put a time frame on when they should be looking at those vendor contracts? I mean, I don't know if they renew every year, but is that a good time, or what the general time frame you would suggest is?
So, Jonathan, to answer your question, in my opinion, vendor contracts should be looked at and updated every year. Oftentimes you'll find that a particular vendor contract is for a 2-year term, and then there will be certain language that indicates that it will be automatically renewed, provided certain benchmarks are met along the life of the contract. To your earlier point, a lot of times when a hospitality industry client is trying to rework a vendor contract, the vendor is only concerned with the price. You mentioned the economy. That's certainly something that's in flux at the moment. And as a result, vendors are always trying to tweak their side of the contract to, of course, get the most money for the service being provided. For the actual client, the hospitality industry business or entity, they need to be looking at insurance procurement language. They need to be making sure that, in my opinion, that those automatic renewals are not in place. There's a lot of different things that as a business returns to its fully functioning state, that you would want to take a look at the contracts, make the modifications as needed, and get those out for execution.
Good advice all around. I would imagine, a lot of your a lot of your clients, if they are smaller operations, feel that they don't have the leverage with vendors, but always a good idea to be able to review it and push back in certain areas, because they're not, standard contracts, or maybe the vendors like to look at them as standard contracts. We don't modify them for anybody, but at the end of the day, as a business owner, you have that right to be able to push back if something you're not comfortable with, or somehow may be unfairly disadvantage your business.
Well, John, especially, I think some of the people that Mark, people or companies that Mark represents, the bigger the company, obviously the vendors have to adjust their expectations and their agreement to what the company wants. I think that a lot of times vendors will have their agreements, and the companies will review them and say, okay, this is what we'll deal with that. And there can be some negotiation, but obviously the vendors are the ones that are going to start the particular contracts. Is that correct, Mark?
Absolutely. And I'm very fortunate that I do get to work with some fairly prominent hospitality businesses in Massachusetts and New England. So certainly their leverage point is a little bit different than maybe a small local independent one location facility or business. But nonetheless, it's a free open market. And even if you're not negotiating the price terms, there is certain language that you can have in any contract that's not controversial, that probably doesn't even have a whole lot of importance to the vendor, but that is actually critical to the operation of the restaurant, the hotel, the movie theater, what have you.
Fantastic. I mean, I think those are great points for any operating business to take up, that sometimes they won't mean anything to the vendor, but for you, they can be protective and in your business. Mark, in terms of, are you, besides the, return to capacity or filling, what else are you seeing within those types of clients as we come out of the pandemic, things for people in the hospitality industry to be thinking about, concerned with? Obviously their contracts. Are you seeing, people that are challenged by staffing? We've heard a lot about, restaurants are closing, or I don't know if you're seeing it in movie theaters, less showings because they just don't have the staffing to continue that. Is that something or a trend that you're seeing? And are there ways to build in, whether it's employee contracts, seasonal contracts, things of that nature, to try and retain employees? or at least as they come out, to be able to attract new employees and put things in place to do that?
Yeah. So if you look at a hotel, for example, they have so many rooms that need to be rented, rented, regardless of the underlying staff. A restaurant has so many tables that they need to seat people at on any given meal cycle. In the movie theater business, they have auditoriums that are ready and product that's ready to be shown. So even though there may not be the staffing that those employers would like to have, it's business as usual. And, we were talking a moment ago about leverage. And one thing that I have recommended to my clients to be very cognizant of as they navigate these staffing issues is don't be tolerant of poor performance. Don't be tolerant of a bad employee. I think some employers feel like they're losing leverage because they don't have somebody at the ready to replace a poor performing employee or somebody who commits some degree of misconduct. So I guess the point is, don't feel that you've lost your leverage. You still need to operate your business in accordance with the policies, procedures, and protocols that your business has already established. And even though there may be a lack of workforce to operate the business, that doesn't mean that you need to excuse poor performance.
So you still have to be consistent with your obligations under the agreements.
Yes, absolutely.
And Mark, the other thing is, I think it's important to note that while you're a litigator, what you do is you counsel a lot of your clients on not only, obviously, we're talking about contracts, but other issues of prevention of problems. And I think that's something interesting in your role, because the courts now, from what I hear, they're like exploding. And from what I'm reading, they're now booked a lot through 2014. So it's important to counsel your clients, and obviously from a prevention standpoint, and also to make it work in terms of financial obligations. Correct?
Absolutely. And it's a form of risk prevention. I mentioned earlier that I think it's better to be offensive rather than defensive. I do think that is I think it's the best strategy in a lot of different arenas.
Excellent. Well, Mark, it's been a pleasure. I mean, I think you've given us some great tidbits to share with the entrepreneurial community, things to think about in terms of as their businesses ramp back up and get busy, how to protect themselves. Mark, if people want to reach out to you, have a conversation, learn a little bit more about your practice, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
I would encourage anybody that wants to get in touch to find me on the Murtha Cullina website. That is www.murthalaw.com. And my direct email address is mheinzelman, that is MHeinzelman @murthalaw.com.
Excellent. It's been a pleasure having you on. Mark Z, as always, thank you very much. Mark Heinzelman of Murtha Cullina. Pleasure having you on and learning about your practice and how you help business owners.
Thank you for coming on, Mark. It's been great.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
And we'll be right back with another segment on Radio Entrepreneurs.